That was good. That was good. All right, so you're there. You're obviously not there anymore. How did it come to an end? Or
Well,
for you and your journey?
yeah. So actually, I was blessed, man. I got recruited from a national organization in Southern California that asked me to come in and function as COO with the intent of succeeding the founder. And so I eventually became CEO of that organization. And it was the largest organization in the country that trained inner city urban youth pastors. So during my 6-year tenure, we trained 23,000 plus individuals who work in urban inner city ministry, majority of them bivocational, because in lower income communities, many ministry leaders are bivocational because they're
Bivocational.
okay.
Explain it.
So in other words, they work a full-time job,
Right.
and they're doing youth ministry on a very small stipend or even in a volunteer state,
Right.
because the community, the ministry community, can afford to compensate them well enough to actually live and eat.
Right.
And whereas in a lot of our suburban contexts, there's full-time staff. I mean, they have multiple staff focusing on student ministry. In our case, in most cases, there's 1 or 2 people trying to do everything. And so we specialized in training for that niche of people and persons who they worked a full-time job,
Right.
but they wanted to give their heart and soul to serving their community in the evenings or on the weekends, if you will.
But you got recruited, but why'd you leave?
Well, it was an opportunity for me to do what I was doing on a national scale.
Gotcha.
Right. So the work we did in the community, and by the way, let me back up. I had the privilege of starting a community development corporation before I left Tennessee. And so it's called the Power Center Community Development Corporation. I eventually brought in a successor who was stellar and knocked it out of the park. That corporation, man, eventually gave birth to several schools, a community performing arts center, and a number of other things. So they're doing tremendous work still to this day.
Right.
And I was able to hire a successor who came in and just absolutely just knocked it out of the park.
Right.
And so that freed me up to actually be able to go to Southern California and think about how to help communities across the nation.
Right.
So at that time, I had been limited to my home city
Right.
and in literally my hood, like Hickory Hill community, we call it Hickory Hood. And if you go to Memphis right now, you know exactly why. Like, my mom still lives in the area. When you walk out of her front door, there's gang graffiti on the fence right in front, and so drug deals happening constantly, cops chasing in the streets. I mean, that's the community. And so that was my experience while I was doing well. I knew that I felt like God was calling me to do something bigger, and by bigger meaning having a broader impact.
Gotcha.
What we were doing was big, but I felt like I could bring influence to other communities around the country and even globally. And so that was my opportunity to step out and take charge in that space.
Must have been a hard conversation, though.
It was.
Right.
It was. Because everything was there. Our stakes were in the ground.
Yeah.
We grew up there. Our families were there and everything. But my wife and I both just had greater ambitions for impacting God's kingdom. And so I think that took us there. So,
Gotcha. Are y'all still cool?
oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
good,
I'm
good.
still, I'm
That's like Robin leaving, like, yo, Batman, like, yo, what's up, man? We taking on the city together.
Yeah. Every I'm blessed, man. I've managed to maintain solidarity in all of my relationships up to this point. In every place that I've left, if you will, I still am a contributor in some capacity.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay, so fast forward to, I guess, more recently. One, you were just telling me about like some amazing stuff you got going on, like an investment group, right?
Oh yeah.
And I saw an article where it was like 5 people. They kept putting money together for a couple of years, and then they like bought a house together or something like that. I think that's amazing. But kind of share a little bit about that investment group.
So we have a community called Beyond the Game Network, and it's myself, Andre Fluellen, who's a retired NFL player, and 2 other guys, Brian Zwerner and Ricardo Diaz. And basically those 2 guys, Ricardo and Brian, have worked in the investment banking world and have done a number of transactions that give them the experience to help other people look at deals.
Right.
Andre and myself had this passion because I've spent so much time working with professional athletes, and Andre was and is a professional athlete, who frankly doesn't mind sharing the fact that he transitioned from the game and went down to 0. And so
How does that happen?
Believe it or not, 88% of NFL players are bankrupt, divorced, or unemployed within 3 years of transitioning from the game. And it's a cycle. And so that's a great question. How does that happen? And that's a whole nother episode,
Right,
we could go on. But bottom line, Dre and I had a passion for altering that statistic. And so we've assembled this group, and our goal is to bring other athletes in 100% to teach them about the business of investing. So there's no financial obligation to them or anything. They get to show up on a monthly basis and just learn how to look at deals. And we have a process that we show them. This is the process you walk through when looking at a deal and scoring and rating a company based upon these categories of interest. So so I think that what it will do is it'll change the game, because they get approached so much. And the tendency for most of us is when something feels right to us, we automatically
let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Exactly.
Right. God told me.
Exactly. And we think we have the brain power that we think we're good enough instinctively to make a decision like that. And you're not that great. You know,
for sure.
In fact, a philosophy we have is that in order to find a unicorn, you're probably going to need to look at least 100 companies. At least 100 companies. And you're lucky if you find a unicorn in looking at 100 companies. That doesn't even happen. To find a decent deal, even, you know, you're going to look at 100 companies. So that just puts it in perspective. So if you've seen 10, I mean, if you're that good, I think everybody would be following you, right? If you could just pick off of, no, there's a process you need to go through to really understand what it means to see a company that is a good deal.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Give me a formula that you use in business. Like, is it like your 4-4, your 4 Ps or something? Give me a formula that people can take away from this and say, okay, I need to follow this checklist. Anthony said, first this and second this. What is a formula that you have?
Well, do you mean a formula for decision making, or formula for
just give me one.
Well, just any formula.
Yep.
Well, I have so the way I manage my consulting business is there's 5 Ps: people, product, process, the 4 pillars of business, which under the pillars are management, operations, marketing, and finance, and then the final P is philanthropy. So people, product, process, pillars, and philanthropy.
Walk me through that.
Well, so the people is literally the people of the business. So thinking about leadership development, et cetera, and all the aspects of people, right? Because essentially people drive the business. Most consulting agencies will look at the business through the lens of its processes, its technology, and all of that. Whereas I genuinely look at the business through the people. If you bring the right people on board and they're empowered, equipped, skilled, et cetera, those people ultimately drive process and everything else. So people, the product itself, right? You need to have a good product.
For sure.
People, product, process. Of course, now I think of process coming in behind those elements. And then, of course,
give me an example of a process.
So Chick-fil-A, right? They have a process from getting the chicken to the chicken sandwich. Right. And why people keep showing up in their drive-through window constantly buying the chicken sandwich. So there's a whole process that, and also even the speed through which you can get a chicken sandwich, right? So, you know, having a good process in place that provides good products and delivery with the expectation that the customer has in mind.
Have you ever went to a company and found out their process was broken? And if you do, give me an example of like where, like, yo, you got all these things right, but you're not making any money because there's a break in the chain of your process. Give me an example.
Well, I can speak to, frankly, nonprofits. A nonprofit example where you know, an organization that could be 5 times its size, but and using the one that I frankly ran in California, I think we could have been 10 times our size. But I think what happened for us is, from a process vantage point, we made a lot of random decisions about where to direct our energy and our time and our resources. And it was difficult for us to really follow a structured process. So creating a strategic plan and actually sticking to that plan. Naturally, things happen and you make adjustments. But I think the willingness to say, here's the plan that we want to execute on and live out, but something would glisten over here, and the founder would have the tendency to actually run to the glistening object. And if you think about it,
it's not a part of the process. That thing isn't in this chain right here.
Exactly. And if you think about a founder-driven organization, the energy of the team follows the founder a lot, right? Because the founder built the team around their personality, if you will, and their energy, et cetera. And so when that founder moves, so goes the organization. And so on a frequent basis, we would breach our process, if you will, for getting to the end result. And it created a lot of tension within the framework of, and this was a multi-million-dollar organization. I mean, it wasn't a small, this was a multi-million-dollar venture. So it can be very disruptive in a negative way when the process is breached.
Let's build a business together. I just want you on my team.
Oh,
right?
man,
I feel
let's
like
go.
We can do something crazy.
Let's go, bro.
Right,
Seriously, we need to talk about that after the
yes.
podcast.
Y'all hear that? Let's go. All right, so the 4 pillars. Number 4 is the pillars.
Yep.
Right?
So management, operations, marketing, and finance. So those are basically anyone. If you're building a business, you may be a one-man team or one-woman team at this point, but you want to begin to think about what this business could look like. And generally speaking, those 4 elements are going to be a part of a healthy business. So management, operations, marketing, finance.
Yep. Gotcha.
Yep.
That makes sense. That's pretty much got it covered, right?
Yeah. And so it pretty much generally speaking, anything you do in a business, especially as it's growing, it's going to touch on those elements.
Gotcha. And what's the 5th P?
Philanthropy. And so I think, especially in today's climate, social enterprises are launching left and right, and just the do good mentality is a big deal in this culture. So being conscious about how you give back and expressing a spirit of generosity for the community that you serve, and just for the business, the customers, if you will, that you serve.
Gotcha. So philanthropy is really like a strategy. Even if you're a CEO to the core, you might be selfish. This is something you probably need to implement as a business strategy at the very least.
Absolutely. I think it should be a part of the core of your business.
Yeah.
Me personally.
Right.
And what I mean by that is not that, for example, if you're running a business that investors are part of, they want to see their profits and they want to see high margins. There are still ways to incorporate philanthropy in a business structure like that, where it's more important for the investors to see higher margins in the business. And so even thinking about ways to volunteer, you could do volunteer hours and other things, project-oriented things that don't necessarily eat away too much at the bottom line of the business, but still allow you to have presence in the community.
Gotcha. Do you deal with a lot of small business entrepreneurs?
I do. Yeah.
Give me 3 or 4 things that you notice consistently that we as small business owners do wrong. You notice it's the same conversation.
Yep. So one, I would say most of us overestimate who we actually are and underestimate who we have the capacity to become.
Ooh, run that back. That was good.
Most of us overestimate who we actually are and underestimate who we have the capacity to become. So a lot of small business leaders are getting up every day and they're running and gunning, and in their minds, they're already there, right? In their minds, they're great, they're phenomenal, et cetera, and they can't figure out why there's a gap between what they want to accomplish and what they're actually accomplishing. And in my opinion, take a step back and have an honest conversation with yourself about who you are and where your business actually is, so that you can make those adjustments. And yes, you are talented. Yes, you are skilled. Yes, you have the capacity to grow. But the reason you're not is because you're in your mind, you're already there.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right, absolutely.
And it sounds simple, but it's not easy for people to execute on constantly taking a step back and self-assessing and reevaluating.
Gotcha.
Right? And so I think, man, just that alone is a game changer. Because, for example, just stopping and saying, I'm literally weak in this area. Stop trying to pretend like I'm not. The admission of that weakness allows me to then bring other people and resources on board. That could be a game changer for my business. But I'm still, in my mind, prideful enough to think that I can get that done and that done and that done and that done too, right? And you can't.
When did you realize you just weren't Superman?
Oh, man. I think...
I know, especially going from 60 volunteers to 10,000. You throw your cape on a little bit. Right?
That was probably when I moved to California, when I made that transition, and life slowed down for me, and I was able to actually catch my breath and realize all the brokenness in my life. So it's interesting because that growth and that acceleration allowed me to hide in many ways from the brokenness of who I really was.